Hey guys, Jamie back with Heroic Scale Gamers. From buying your first box of minis and paint to being a competent player at the gaming table, we got you covered. Back with the fifth video in our new series on getting the Harlequins all painted up. This is basically the finishing touches. So we started off with an army that we bought. We stripped the models down, which we're going to kind of show where they came from. And we have since taken them and turn them into this. So once again, we got the finished product. So in the last one, we did some of these line highlights that we showed here on the red one on our blue one, here on the side, and you can already see the difference that it makes. It just makes us pop. So in this video, we're actually going to show you all the finishing touches. We're going to show you how we did the gems, how I did the cockpit, and then how I did the masks. So we're going to set that off to the side and go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to do the mask, because the mask is a two-step process. So if I do the first step, I can then let that dry while I'm doing the beginning parts of the gems, and then we can actually come back and finish off the metalwork very quickly and easily. So I'm going to clean that off real quick. All right, so let me get this better in. There we go. All right, so I'm working with some Retributor armor, gold paint from Citadel. And essentially what we're going to do is we're just going to paint over the mask on both sides. And I'm painting from the top down, which is going to create a small shadow in the eye sockets that I kind of want to leave there. But we want to make sure that we get the entirety of the mask. But you want to be very, very careful, because we don't want to bleed this over onto our black armor paint, onto our black armor. And I find it way easier to move the miniature so that I can paint in an up and down motion than it is to try and move the brush side to side, because your hand and your fingers doesn't naturally move in those directions. And you have most control, if you notice, when you're moving upwards and downwards with your finger. And it allows you the best brush control. That is not too shabby. All right, there we go. So now we've got some gold paint on both of our death masks. So I am using a Army Painter character brush for this step. And actually, I'm going to use this same brush for the next step, which is the first step of our gems. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually do red gems. I think red gems stand out the best. I think they are very, very easy to do. Basically, it's a three-color triad. So I use a deep red, a lighter red as a first highlight, and then an orange as a third color. In this case, it's going to be Mephiston red, Evil Sun scarlet, and Troll Slayer orange, all from the Citadel line. And then I'm going to put a dot of white scar in the upper corner, which shows the light refracting through the gem and then creating the grading color through the gem itself. And then, because these are all matte paints, we will then take a gloss varnish and put it over top to make it look shiny. Now, once again, this is all about forcing perspective, right? And the best way, this is kind of an old school, this is how Games Workshop did gems for years and years and years. A lot of other people do them in different ways. I still like the old ways. I think they look really good. And essentially what you're going to do is, so we're going to pick this gem right here, and we are going to basically paint about 3/4 of it with this red, but we're going to leave a half moon of black in the upper left-hand corner. And essentially, if you've ever looked at an actual gemstone, where the light goes in is its darkest point, and then it gets brighter and refracts light as the light travels through it. And we're going to force that perspective with our paints. And what's neat is that you can change the direction that the light is facing simply by changing the direction of where you leave that black semicircle. So if we go on this other side, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to do it in the opposite direction. And so basically this will look like if this thing were in motion, that the light source is directly behind it, but it is actually refracting differently through the gem based on the side that the gem is on. So there we go. Now, the neat thing is that if we look, our gold that we just did a second ago is already dry. And we're now going to do our last and final step on that. What I have here is some Agrex Earthshade mixed half and half with some Lamian Medium. I call this my magic. So everyone will tell you, Agrex Earthshade and Nuln Oil are two of the greatest things Games Workshop ever invented. Well, I can tell you, adding a little bit of Lamian Medium to it makes it even better. Because it cuts the surface tension and it allows it to basically just pool in the recesses, and it only lightly tints. It only lightly tints the actual surface, flat surfaces. So what'll happen is, see if I can focus that in. So you can kind of see in there, especially in the mouth where it's darkened up, just slightly. And then as it dries, it'll actually darken even more. And it just gives it a nice cool effect. It almost makes it look aged. Get something on this side. I'll see if you can kind of see it as well. All right. So now, while that's been happening, what you'll find is that our red is dry. So we can now move on to step 2, which is taking a little bit of Evil Sun Scarlet. And we're going to do the exact same thing, but this time we're going to paint that just slightly on the inside, leaving some of the Mephiston red showing from the original base coat. So when we get in here, I'm going to start just a little bit further down. There we go. You know, as we continue to do this, I'm going to get much better at this camera placement, I promise. All right, so then we're going to come on over to the other side and do the exact same thing. And once again, we're going to start about halfway up, and we're going to do our semicircle down, but we're going to leave some of that Mephiston red still showing. So you can really see it there. All right. Oops. Pulled it out of frame there. All right, and then last but not least, for the actual red color of the gem, we're going to take just a little bit of this Troll Slayer orange, and we're going to basically just put a very small amount of this in the bottom right and left hand side of each gem. So with this one here, essentially what we're doing is we're just putting a little bit on the bottom. And essentially that is where the light has refracted all the way through the gem and finished off at the very, very bottom tip. And boom, just like that. So you can see it's really kind of a fiery red and then pops out to an orange. So now the next step we're going to do is take just a tiny dab of white. And I mean the tiniest of dabs. And we're going to put just a small amount. This time I'm going to use a Army Painter detail brush, which is just a little bit smaller with a little bit finer point. And I find it's a lot easier to do this upside down. So I'm just going to put a dot. Come over to this side, and we're going to put a dot. So now you can actually see where the light has hit the gem, and once again it looks like it's refracting through. And once again, this is just forced perspective. We know that light isn't actually going through it because it's a piece of plastic, but we're making it look as such. And that's where the cool effect comes in. So we're going to give that just a second to dry, and while that's drying, we're going to mix up a little bit of Art Coat varnish and a little bit of water on my palette. And this is what actually makes it shine in the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to gloss varnish the entire thing. You can see it really gives it a shine. And do the same thing on this side. And it just kind of finishes it off. You can see how shiny that looks. All right. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to actually paint in the windshield. And what I do for that is I take some Celestar Gray from Citadel. I get that on my palette, and I want this to be pretty watered down, so I'm going to add a couple drops of water in for this one. Because this takes about 2 to 3 smooth coats with some very thin paint to get a nice flat gray surface. Now, this was much easier to do on the other one because I had accidentally broke the gun off when I was actually starting this process. But I wouldn't suggest breaking your models to make the painting easier, unless you want to do a lot of correcting afterwards. So, what I like to do here is, if you look, there is actually a rim that goes all the way around the outside and through the very center to create glass panels. We're basically going to fill those in. And what I like to do is I like to place my brush down and then push out to those edges. I don't want to start at that edge and try to pull it down, because you're actually going to find that you're not going to get it painted as well. But if you do that, what ends up happening is you make fewer mistakes and you get a better finished product. And then when you get a larger part of your flat surface, you can just brush like you normally would. Once again, I'm going to push into that corner and draw it along that edge. And then once again, as you can see, I'm turning the model as I paint. Because once again, I want to have as much control as possible to make as few mistakes as I can. So we kind of, while we're letting that side dry, we're going to go over to the other side and we'll do the exact same thing. And then once that side's dry, we're going to go over it with a second coat. And that's going to give us our nice, smooth, finished, flat gray. And then if you're watching, how do you think I'm going to make that look all shiny and glassy? Well, anyone who's watching, if you figured it's going to be some Art Coat varnish, you'd be correct. Because that's what it does. And so what ends up happening is that you get this really cool effect, and it'll actually make it look like glass. Now, I can tell you it doesn't actually take quite as long as I'm taking to do this. I'm being very deliberate and I'm being very slow so that I can actually talk through it as well. But when you're just sitting around and actually doing the painting, this takes minutes. You can kind of come over and you can see that this other side isn't quite dry yet. And since it isn't quite dry yet, we don't want to touch it. You want to make sure that it's actually fully dry before you try to put another coat on it. Because if you were to put paint on this now, all you're going to do is move the paint around that's not quite dry, and it's going to leave a indentation, and it's going to look horrible. So let it fully dry. So in that case, we're just going to work on a little bit more. And if you do make a mistake, like I just did there, I kind of bled over a little bit too much. Once again, you just take a little bit of your undercoat, which in this case is my Pro Acryl primer, and you can literally brush that on and fix that mistake. It'll take just a second. But you can kind of see what I was talking about with the gun. The gun being in the way does make this just a little bit more difficult. But once again, if you're just a little patient and you're moving your model around properly, you'll find that you can get it done quite quickly. Alright, so this other side is now finished. So while that has finished, I'm going to go ahead and come in here. I'm going to do that second coat. And once again, the reason that we're doing a second thin coat is because it is much easier to build up thin coats than it is to put on just a thick coat. If you put it on too thick, it'll look all chunky and gross. Whereas, once again, just having a little bit of patience, you just get a better overall finished product. Boom. So now once that's dry, we can then art coat it. And then once we've got the art coat done, essentially what you end up with is this. So you can see the shine that comes off the light as it's reflecting, and it makes it look like glass. And that's pretty much the last step. After that, pretty much what you have is a finished product. And that's something that anyone would be proud to put on a tabletop. And it takes not a ton of time, but just a little bit of patience. And bing, bang, boom, now you have a great looking boat.